Hi everyone, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. If you're watching it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the show, make sure to subscribe so that you get notified when a new show is released. And if you'd like to find links to videos or MP3 files, just go to miamighostchronicles.com, and you can also submit any eerie experiences you've had at the Submit Your Story tab. Also, hook up with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find information not only about new shows, but also about monthly free merchandise giveaways. So get comfortable, enjoy this new episode, and just imagine it's a dark and stormy night where not a creature is stirring, not even a mouse. And if a creature is stirring, you hope it's a mouse. Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing? Good, I hope, because I'm doing fantastic. And as you know, we're here now at the beginning of 2019. A lot of interesting stuff going on. As you know, I'm already starting to work on season 6 of Stories of the Supernatural, so I'm hoping you guys are going to come back and watch the show, because I have a lot of interesting guests, just like the one that I have on here tonight. Okay, and the lady I have, her name is Skye Alexander. Now, Skye is the author of numerous fiction and nonfiction books, and she's also known for her work in the body, mind, spirit field, which you know I am the number one fan of that. She is also an artist and astrologer, does tarot reading, feng shui practitioner, and drummer, and she's been featured in the Discovery Channel's documentary Secret Stonehenge. She also founded the Right Stuff Press and co-founded the publishing cooperative Level Best Books. So I want to welcome you. How are you doing tonight, Skye?
I'm doing fantastic, as you are, Marlene, and I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on to talk with your guests.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure, and I am so excited because to me, and I mean, of all the things, I'm fascinated by everything that you're involved in, but the mind-body-spirit connection, to me, I think a lot of times people, they don't realize how enmeshed those areas are. But before we get to that, I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests is, how did you become involved in, did you have some type of experience as a child paranormal, or did you just evolve and get into all these fields?
Well, I think from a very, very early age, I was fascinated with all things that were, let's say, not normal in my community or in my family. Although I have to credit my mom with being able to encourage my weirdness from a very early age. And we participated in some Duke University studies on ESP when I was 11. I started reading astrology books and all kinds of other stuff like that from a very early age. But I always had a sense of connection to the bigger picture, to nature, to the spirits and the entities that surround us, and that just has grown as I've matured as an adult.
Right, because I think a lot of people, because of course we go by what we can see with our senses, and we don't realize that there's another world that's very enmeshed with ours. It almost coexists. And, people either are not aware of it or afraid of basically what we can't see or touch. But it still affects us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that our scientific community and our religious communities and our social structure does not nurture our ability to reach beyond that physical realm, that physical definition of what is reality. Sure. But if we look back through history, we see that all cultures and all times everywhere have embraced a larger picture of what's out there, who's out there, and how are we connected to all of that.
Of course. And well, even now, the physicists, are saying, as far as atomic and subatomic, like that the apparition, the apparent, if you look at something that looks solid, it's just an appearance as far as we can see. But if we could look at a subatomic level, we'd see things are vibrating and they're not as solid as they appear. And of course, because we always think of things as being solid and can't be moved or you can't go through. And that's not the case, really. In other words, just because we can't see it doesn't mean that that's not exactly there.
Well, Heisenberg showed that the observer influenced what was being observed.
Yes, you're absolutely
and therefore,
right.
There is no such thing as objectivity as we'd like to believe it is. We all participate in our realities and in what happens to us and what happens beyond us.
Right. And a lot of people don't. And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes, Skye, people think that they themselves on an individual basis have little or no effect on anything. In other words, everybody thinks that to produce an effect, it has to be a large group of people. And that's not the case.
No, it's not. Every little thing we do connects with every other thing that's out there. I mean, we're all part of a great web, if you will, a great cosmic web. And that what happens here where I am in Texas, and what happens where you are in Miami, and what happens in China, et cetera, is felt throughout that whole web, just like a little insect creeping across a spider's web. That spider can be a long way away, but you'll still feel that. And we do too, even though we're not necessarily consciously aware of it, it still impacts us.
Right, exactly. That sometimes I think people think, well, I'm just nobody. I don't have it. And I'm thinking to myself, not only physically, but mentally and spiritually, I imagine the thoughts and feelings we put out not only affect us, of course, but like you said, it's like a ripple effect or a web where eventually it's felt across. And now that you brought that up, because, you know, we mentioned a little bit earlier before we started recording about the law of attraction. Okay.
Right.
And you remember this was, I think it was it 2007 when The Secret came out, which is when it kind of like, I mean, that concept had been around for quite a while, but that's when it really like got a lot of exposure. And
right, to the general audience,
the general audience. And a lot of people were excited, but then a lot of people poo-pooed it. But I was like, no, it's just that it was done in very broad strokes because, of course, it was being put into a movie to entertain.
Yes.
But the concept, I personally believe, is valid.
Oh, absolutely.
Both positive and negative. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that being aware of that is very important for each of us, because we do create our own realities, and we do have impact on what's going on around us and on everybody else, in the lives of everyone else, and not only people, but animals, plants, the environment, the whole cosmos is interlinked, in my opinion. I've just been rereading some of the old Seth material that I read back in the early, mid-'80s, I guess. And it talks about that in great depth, about how our emotions, our thoughts as human beings impact our environment and the weather and the conditions in that, you know, that we're talking about now a lot in terms of climate change and, you know, major earth upheavals, if you will.
Right.
That it's important for us, in my opinion, to be aware that our thoughts have a lot of power beyond just our own little lives. Sure. And I'm using little as a
because that, I mean, when we compare ourselves out of, you know, a population of billions worldwide, that's how most people think of themselves. But and one of the things that, and which is part and parcel of what, you know, as on an individual basis, because let's face it, everybody, despite, you know, that we share, whether it's, you know, the street we live on, the state, you know, worldwide, you know, but everybody ultimately is living their lives, or hopefully you are, and you're engaged in life, is what I tell everybody. You should be engaged in life, you know, shouldn't hide from it. But a lot of people sometimes, they feel that they are at the mercy of circumstance or fate or whatever you want to call it. And I think that, let's say, going back to this law of attraction, that a lot of people say, so you're telling me that I could just sit there and things. And I'm like, no, but whatever you focus your attention on, okay, you're going to pull towards you in some way or other.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to give the example. You remember, I don't know if you remember, I'm going to use the movie again because it's, you know, how the guy one of them, he sees himself driving a certain car, and he makes believe, and people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to sit in my living room and I'm going to pretend, like I'm driving this sports car I want. And people don't realize, and all of a sudden I'm going to go out my front door and there's the sports car, and I'm like, no. But if you start, things will shift around in your reality to bring that manifestation to you, whether it's because you make more money. In other words, it takes you, maybe through a route you could never have imagined. Sometimes people kind of are their own worst enemies when they want something. They think, yeah, I'd like that, but I don't see how that could ever come about.
Or that we don't feel we're worthy for it to come to us.
Yes, exactly. It's like, man, I'd like it, and you're absolutely right, because you know what? I'm a big believer, and I understand truly the power of our subconscious mind and expectations. And it's unfortunate how limiting sometimes we can be as to exactly what you just said. Are we worthy? Do we deserve it? Or
do we even want the responsibility if we get it? Oh,
you said the R word, responsibility. Oh my God, that's a bad word, Skye. I'm only kidding. But
well, we think about it. I mean, if we decide, for example, that we think we might want to have a romantic affair, for example,
yes,
a relationship,
yes,
but are we willing to do the work that's necessary? Are we willing to adjust our lives so that we can find companionable ground between us? All of those things have to come into play. And sometimes I think that we block our opportunities, whether it's for love, whether it's for a successful career, whether it's for health, whatever, because we don't want to either do the work or take the responsibility, or, as you and I were talking about earlier, deal with the changes that will come if that enters our lives.
Sure. And people, and one of the things, because that's one of the things I do understand, is because I was a hypnotherapist for many years, is that our subconscious mind will extrapolate from that change all the things that can come with it. And usually it goes in the direction of the negative, because we feel safer being in our comfort zone. It's like, this is what we know. Despite what we say we want, like you said, maybe I would love to have this romance with this person, whatever. But then usually our subconscious mind goes down the road, exactly what you described. What if I'm dumped? What if this person does something? What if I fall madly in love and then they break my... Yeah, we go and... Because...
all those what ifs.
Oh, what ifs, yes. And I think a lot of people, don't get me wrong, I think it's, it's okay, of course, nobody wants to be rejected, but I think sometimes people cheat themselves out of a lot of experiences because of that fear.
Right, I think we limit ourselves, yes, by that fear, exactly.
Right, they want the guaranteed outcome. And
that isn't necessarily what ensures growth.
No, it's not.
In my opinion, growing spiritually and in many other ways, emotionally, psychologically, etc., involves taking some risks, and it involves stretching beyond your comfort zone.
Sure.
But that is scary for all of us, because we don't trust the unknown, and we don't trust ourselves.
Yes. Oh my God.
That's bad for me. We don't trust that we really do have power, and we are good people, and we are moving in a direction that is healing and can be happy, and we just limit ourselves too much.
And I think also sometimes, Skye, people don't know how to forgive themselves. Let's say you made mistakes in your past. You made mistakes, bad judgment, stupid stuff. I mean, come on, if you've got a pulse. And some people, they never forgive themselves. So later on, they're always afraid to make a decision, because they always got that cloud. When I did, look at the last time when I made that decision, look what happened. So they lose total trust in their better judgment. And it's like,
yeah.
Hey.
But we're also encouraged in our society to trust the powers that be, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
Trust people who are outside of ourselves, whether they be religious leaders, political leaders, our parents, our, whoever it happens to be. We're not encouraged to trust ourselves and our own, what I think of as the quiet voice within that inner voice of wisdom that really does know what's right for us and our intuition. Rather, we project it out onto others and say, well, why don't you tell me what I should be doing? Or why don't you, what's right?
Right. And the bio that I described, you do tarot and you do astrology. Let me ask you, Skye, do you ever get people that, even though they come for a tarot or an astrological, for you to do their chart, they're at the same time want almost that you're going to give me good news, right? Like, this is going to work out, right?
Everybody wants good news, and I usually try to give them good news first.
Right.
And then if I see things that don't look quite so comfortable, I feel obliged to tell them that. But I also try to give them some understanding about where is this coming from, and what are the things you can learn from it, and what are the best things you can do to handle an astrological crisis, if you will, that's coming up. And you may not be able to avoid that crisis, but you can handle it in good ways or less effective ways, if you will.
Right.
And so that, my opinion is that I'm not going to hide that from somebody, because that's not my job. That's not why they come to me.
Right.
But I also want to offer constructive suggestions, at least, that they can choose to follow if they want to.
Right. And
everything, I believe... Go ahead.
Well, what we talked about earlier was that sometimes, and I'm sure you've done charts for people, or even a tarot reading, where you see this change. And by this, I mean not that they're some type of major change that, and, sometimes people, despite what they say, when it really comes down to it, they're very resistant to change. And I'm sure you've seen sometimes where, like, it's going to happen whether you want to or not. And I wonder if you give them the advice to go with the flow, because sometimes some changes, there's just no way to escape it.
Well, I do think that there are changes that come to us that are foreseeable, and they, as you said, are probably unavoidable. However, in my opinion, we also position ourselves to experience those changes for our own soul growth or our own spiritual, personal growth. So by allowing those changes to manifest in our lives, we can grow and benefit and maybe have some really wonderful things happen that we would not have expected otherwise. However, as you mentioned, it's kind of natural for us to be a little apprehensive about that, because most of us have a little bit of control freak in us.
Oh, of course, yes.
And we're apprehensive about the unknown. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that we don't trust ourselves. We haven't been taught to trust our own judgment and our own feelings. We've been taught to put that out onto authorities. And so when we're faced with changes, we don't necessarily think that we can find our way through them and that we can handle those in a constructive manner that will be beneficial to us. But we can. And sometimes it's going to be hard. I mean, we're going to lose our loved ones, or we're going to get fired from a job, or we're going to face a health crisis. But that doesn't mean that those things do not have positive ramifications in our lives, or that it doesn't mean we can't benefit from going through those experiences.
Let me ask you, Skye, do you think that sometimes, and that, for example, exactly like what you said, as let's say a job change, that sometimes, like you said, when we fail to follow our intuition, or the universe like tapping us on the shoulder, giving us hints like, hey, maybe it's time for you to move on, let's say to another job, and we kind of like go into that, no, this is what I know, or like you said, you're kind of like afraid that you don't believe you'll be able to do something else, and then all of a sudden, because you haven't followed your intuition, the universe drops like a big pink slip on your desk. and then at that moment you're like, think it's catastrophic, but it's almost like something that you knew all along, but you were resistant to it or didn't trust yourself.
Well, I think that if we train ourselves to pay attention to the small things, the small indicators, the little coincidences.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah.
We can then gradually move up to handling the bigger ones.
Right.
And I feel like the more we resist making the small changes along the way and being aware of what those are telling us, the more likely we are to hit a really big crisis or big demand on our psyches later on.
Well, it's
we can prepare ourselves.
Right, like almost like if you practice following your intuition on the little stuff, when you start getting inklings about certain things, you're more trustful of what you're feeling.
Right, because sometimes the universe has to hit you over the head with a 2x4 to get your attention.
Yes, exactly. You're right. That's a good. And people don't realize, and how I'm sure, it's happened to me that when things happen, it's like that part of you that goes, "I knew it," and it's of course, yeah, you did know it. You just didn't you chicken out, and don't want to go where that leads because, whatever the circumstances are in your life, it's like, oh, I'm afraid what happens. And I mean, a million reasons why we hang on to what is familiar, because despite everybody's into their routines, some people more than others, but the familiar is, it's all about the pleasure. And now let me ask you, now, like we were talking about this, at the beginning of the year, this is when everybody makes their New Year's resolutions, and a lot of the times it has to involve some type of change, whether it's because lose weight or get healthy, whatever. What do you see coming up for 2019, Skye? Overall, what do you see coming up?
Yes, I think that the term here is overall, because in astrology, each person's personal charts, individual birth charts, will be affected differently according to the positions and the movements of the planets and the sun and moon, etc. Well, not the sun, doesn't actually move, but we look at it from this position on Earth as if it does.
Right.
Anyway, so each person is affected individually as well as collectively. Okay. But we do have some really major situations astrologically coming up this year, and one of them very much deals with what you and I were talking about just a few minutes ago, about change versus holding on to the status quo, or holding on to your past, your comfort zone, etc. And that, in astrological terms, is described as the position of the planet Uranus, which represents change and upheavals and new experiences, in a stressful position, forming a stressful position as we view it from Earth, looking into the sky, a stressful position to the planet Saturn, which is the planet of the past, of status quo, of everything that is stable, secure, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we have that conflict going on. The two planets are what we call square to each other, which is it generates a stressful energy between them. And so we're going to continue to see a conflict, as we do see in our society right now. We see it politically in terms of new energies being brought in to change the old way of doing things. And there's a lot of stress and a lot of conflict and a lot of excitement that's generated by that. So I think this is going to be a theme this whole year for all of us on a collective level. Right. But for some people, particularly those of us who have planets, sun, moon, etc., other planets in early degrees of Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio, or Leo.
Okay. So, and if I understand correctly, it's everybody gets some change, but to different degrees depending on what is in your chart. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we also have Pluto thrown in there, which is the planet of, and these are also going to be very, very important to people who have a lot of Capricorn energies in their charts, because both Saturn and Pluto are positioned in Capricorn right now. Pluto is the planet of death and renewal, the destroyer, and the planet of rebirth, like the phoenix.
Right.
So that we're going to see a lot of major transformations going on here. And they're going to often be of a somewhat hidden or subtle nature, so that we won't necessarily always see the whole picture right out there like it's on a movie screen. A lot of things are going to be hidden. A lot of things are going to gradually emerge, but it's really the death throes for a lot of our old ways of doing things and our old belief systems and our old structures that need to be updated.
Right. And I'm glad you point that out, because sometimes people think of change as like, but then it's like you change things and you get rid of the old to bring in the new, and that's many times what we need.
Yes, absolutely, because new growth cannot exist until room is made for it. And even things that we think of as being bad, so to speak, in quotations, like a forest burning down.
Right.
That has to happen sometimes so that new growth can rise out of those ashes.
Exactly. Yeah, you need that renewal process, but like you said, something has to die or be done away with or change to make room for the new.
And we look at our own lives and see something that we thought was the worst thing that could possibly happen to us.
Yes.
Turns out to be the best opportunity that we ever had.
Yes, but only in hindsight, of course. That's what happens to us. We don't. It's afterwards when we look back, but when we're right in the middle of it, we're like, oh no. Yeah, and it's like a part of you mentioned it. People trusting themselves that they're going to be able to handle whatever comes up, even if nobody's giving them an exact map. It's like you're going to be okay.
That's true, and we don't have an exact map. If we go back to the idea of free will, and that our thoughts and our emotions and our perceptions alter whatever happens to us, or create whatever happens to us, or both, then we have to believe that we have the power to take charge of this, and that we are the authors, the architects of our existence, whatever that may be. And that, to me, feels very empowering, that I don't feel like I'm a victim. I'm not vulnerable. Right. I'm not just some weakling who's here waiting for the universe to act on me. I'm a participant.
Exactly. And a lot of people fail to realize that they do have that power. And Skye, let me ask you, and I know some people will say when it comes to astrology versus, like you said, free will, how does one work with the other? Let's say, because when you look at astrology, you're thinking, okay, basically this is I've kind of got like a roadmap that my life is going to follow based on when and where I was born. And how does free will interact with what's been laid out for you because of your chart?
Well, in my opinion, we are presented with energies. The planets, as they move through the skies, which we call transits or progressions in astrological terms, they send energy in our direction. We decide how we want to use that energy.
Okay. Exactly.
So we have a Uranus transit, and that's sending us the energy of change. How do we want to change? How do we want to embrace or reject new experiences? We get the energy of Mars, and it says, well, it's time to be assertive. It's time to, act in the world. So how do we choose to do that? It's a combination of both. We have infinite possibilities, probably. Okay. But we are influenced by astrological factors in a particular direction, and they just are sending us material to work with, if you will, in the form of energy. And we get to choose how we want to use that.
Plus, I imagine also if a person is working with an astrologer and their chart, I guess the timing is also important. You know how they say everything in life is timing? I guess depending on what you want to do, you decide, is this a good time for me specifically to do or not do? Because I'm sure, haven't you ever told somebody, yeah, that's a good idea, but the time is not right now? Yes,
that's true. One of the most common ones that, a lot of people know about, even if they're not really keyed into astrology, is Mercury retrograde.
Oh, yeah.
And, 4 times a year, 3 weeks, we get Mercury looking like, from our perspective here on Earth, as if it's moving backward in the sky. And what happens during those periods is that everything gets confused and conversations get mixed up and communication gets delayed and, travel is complicated. And consequently, during those particular times, astrologers generally recommend don't sign contracts, don't buy a house, don't, make major commitments, think through everything 2 or 3 times or 4 or 5 times, don't undergo elective surgery, and all kinds of things where complications due to miscommunication can occur.
Right.
So, you could say, is it fated? Well, sort of. But we also have the ability, if we're aware of it, to deal with those issues. And as you said earlier, the timing isn't right. Let's wait and launch this business after Mercury goes direct. Or let's have this surgery when we're more clear about what's going on.
Exactly, right. And people don't realize sometimes that timing, maybe the outcome of certain things can be either, like when everything, haven't you ever done stuff and doors open up for you, like it's like great, everything is going, and then other times you do certain things and you just can't catch a break. Everything is an obstacle and things don't work out. You miss the call, all those things that get in the way. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that might have to do also with what's going on astrologically as to smooth sailing. That's versus it's like, man, this is so difficult.
Look at it. Yeah, I kind of look at it like the ocean's tides, ebbing and flowing, swells where you're up or you're down. And, there are times when you need to be out there, and there are times when you need to withdraw. And that's basically just putting yourself in tune with the cycles that are affecting you. And, that brings probably more comfort overall and more success.
Right. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like what you pointed out. If it's Mercury retrograde, don't sign a contract. If wait, until you're out of it, because okay, that's good to know. Other things that people, believe me, I've had my own experiences during Mercury retrograde, including getting lost in Vermont. You name it. It's been stuff like it's like. So when you say those things, it's like, believe me. I've had experiences along those lines that normally I know for a fact that wouldn't have happened to me. But it's like,
and we were talking earlier about a little bit of touching on the ideas of witchcraft and magic and that sort of thing. And those, being in touch with and in tune with those energies is really, really important in terms of getting the outcome that you seek.
Yes.
Like with Mercury retrograde, for example, a lot of things are likely to be delayed, or they're going to get confused, or you're not going to get the outcome that you desire. Likewise, you want to pay attention to particularly lunar cycles, so that if you're doing some sort of a spell for increase or to attract something or growth, you want to do it while the moon is increasing also. You want to do it during the waxing moon. Whereas if you want to do something to encourage decrease or endings, you want to do it when the moon is diminishing in light, when it's waning. And just harmonizing yourself with those cycles in nature will make a big difference in whatever outcomes you seek.
Let me ask something, Skye, along those lines of, let's say, like you said, whether it's the waning or the waxing moon. And I know, for example, if somebody is trying to do something, a ritual or anything, let's say for protection, would that be versus removing negativity? How's that? Like, people sometimes get confused. Should one do one in one cycle versus the other, for example?
Yes, I would do those during the waning moon.
Okay. As far as,
because you want to decrease the harmful, negative, or uncomfortable energies that you are experiencing, and you want to perhaps bind whatever force is generating those energies in your life. Okay. So you want to do that while the moon is diminishing, while it's waning, in order to stay in tune with the timing of decrease.
Okay, exactly that. So in other words, the intent is what you're saying should be your how you make a decision as far as the timing. Let's say, is it one or the other? And then, of course, I mean, nowadays you could find the cycles of the moon very easily just about anywhere on the internet as far as the timing when you want to do that.
Yeah, you can definitely look up that. Most calendars also will show you, even physical calendars will show you when the different cycles of the moon are in effect.
Let me ask you, Skye, do you recommend that people, whether it's smudging or doing something, let's say at home or anything, do you think they should do it on a regular basis? Not because anything's bad's happened. I'm not saying because sometimes because people just pick up negative stuff or whatever. Do you make any recommendations along those lines?
Did you say smudging your house?
Yeah. I'm using smudging as an example of...
Yeah, I think it's a good idea on a periodic basis. Certainly if you've had any kind of, let's say, argument or upset or disturbance in your life, that energy is going to hang around your house for a while. And yes, I think smudging is a good idea, particularly if you're moving into a new place and you want to get rid of the vibes from the previous occupants. Yes, you definitely want to smudge then. Or even if you buy something, let's say, you're into antiques and you want to buy something, you want to get rid of all that energy that the previous owners have placed on that piece of furniture or that oriental rug or whatever it is. So smudging then is a very good thing to do. But apart from that, I think that you can do it whenever you feel that the energy in your home is not harmonious with what you want it to be. Sometimes it feels heavy or stuck, and smudging is one way to get rid of that. There are other ways too.
Right, and the reason why I bring this up is, I've been a paranormal investigator for many, many years, and sometimes people don't realize that when they, that example that you gave, you move into a new place, and sometimes people have weird feelings, and it's not necessarily a haunting as in supernatural agency. It's that maybe whatever took place there within those walls is kind of still, like the fabric of the place still holds it. We're going to go with the negative, because usually that's what people pick up on, whether there was a lot of arguing or just stuff was going on there. And you pick up on it, and you might feel uncomfortable in a certain room, or even depending on the type of person that lived there. So that advice that you gave as far as smudging, I think, is a great idea, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be a haunting. It could just be that maybe... Right. About 10 years ago, I bought a house where the previous owner had committed suicide in the house. Okay.
So I did a ritual to send him to the light, because he was still hanging around there.
Okay, he was still there. Okay.
Yeah, and his sadness and his misery that caused him to take his life were still there, resonating in the house. And so I have a Native American shaman friend, and the two of us got together and we did a ritual to send him back to the light, where he belonged. And after that, it was, everything just felt like all that darkness had lifted from the place.
Oh, I bet.
But not everybody. I also go to a house in the summer that was built in 1690.
Wow.
And there's a lovely old lady who passed there peacefully, and she just comes through and she talks to me, and she sometimes shows herself to people who are there, and that is a very positive energy, and we don't want to get rid of her.
Okay. Wow, that's an old house. Wow, that's great.
It's one of the oldest in America, one of the oldest still occupied houses in America.
I bet. God, because people don't realize, compared to other parts of the world, we're kind of a young, as far as buildings and stuff, we really don't have that many as far as 1690. You always think of Europe or other places where they have far older buildings. And to me, it's, there's definitely, especially imagine a structure that old, even if you don't have, let's say, an active paranormal agency, I imagine it's got to have a feel to it, because it's been lived in for so long.
Right, and there are all kinds of activities that have gone on there. There are
Yes.
births and deaths and weddings and celebrations and sadness and, all kinds of things. And many, many, many people who have passed through that space. So it's kind of fun to experience those energies.
Oh, yeah.
And to feel that we still have contact with those souls, those entities, those beings who are on the other side.
Well, and I tell everybody, because some people, especially if I've done an investigation, because a person died. And I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe up to a few years ago, when I say comparatively, people used to have their children and die at home. That was the norm. Unless you die somewhere, people would die at their houses. That doesn't mean that just because you died in the house or even had a wake, which a lot of families did, that's haunted, because this was what everybody did.
Well, I think it also makes us more connected to and more comfortable with the process of life, death, renewal. We don't see it as something that's scary and foreign. It's part of our normal existence.
Yeah. I remember a story my grandmother told me, and I remember when she told me, I was like, oh my gosh. She says that when she was a younger woman, of course, I think she was in her 20s, she had a next door neighbor who also was a younger woman, but apparently she was sick with tuberculosis, TB. She knew she was going to die. And she asked my grandmother, would you be kind enough to, I have something I want to wear. Would you please be good enough to dress me after I'm dead? And I was like, oh my God, if my neighbor asked me to do that. But this was normal. You relied on your neighbors. Can you come over and clean me up and put this certain suit of clothes or dress on me? And because she, like I said, they were going to have the wake at the house. And my grandmother did it. It was like, she took it as stride. It was like, okay, I'll do that for you, sure. And we think of that now and it'd be like, what?
Well, we think it's weird now because we have distanced ourselves from this part of life and therefore made it more scary.
Yes.
Because it seems foreign. I mean, we only think of death as people in hospitals.
Yes.
We don't see also the value and the beauty of being with people during those final times and during their passing.
Yes, I agree that, I mean, it's despite being a difficult moment for family members, and of course we all want to think of ourselves as dying in old age and while we sleep, the perfect way to leave our lives. But sometimes that's just not the way it is. And, unless there's certain circumstances, I think that, and I'm sure you've heard the stories where some family member will not pass away till everybody's there, or the other way around. They wait, maybe if they think there's certain family members cannot handle it, till they step away, depending on, whatever the circumstances are. But I think that there's something like a recognition of finality that we understand as human beings when we see that and understand that, well, that's the fate that awaits us all. It is what it is.
And I think it's important for us to not shy away from that, but to honor that as part of the whole cycle, if you will.
Yes.
Because as you said, it is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be bad. No. I think, and not everybody would agree with me, of course, but I believe we choose our own time and our own way to enter the world and to exit it.
Yes. And some people, and I'm sure there's people that say, some people, especially I imagine if you're older or maybe if you've been very ill, you are more willing, and I know some people recognize, I'm sure you've heard of stories that not having to do anything with age, some people have a recognition that they're going to pass away, that something's going to happen, like they make out their wills or they leave instructions, and everybody's like, how did this person know that maybe they were going to have, let's say, a fatal accident, for example, even if there was nothing to indicate it. And people, they kind of recognize it on a soul level that their time is ending.
Yeah, and I think that every one of us chooses that, and we are aware of it. I've had many, many experiences, as I'm sure you have, that make it very clear to me that we are aware of this. When my father died, for example, and he died in an automobile accident. There was nothing we had any knowledge of illness, and it wasn't like it was expected. But myself and all four of my siblings, shortly before he was in that accident, had dreams about him dying.
Wow.
And so that was interesting. But I've also had those sorts of awarenesses with other people close to me who died unexpectedly. So
yes.
I do think that we are aware of that. It's just that most of the time we don't pay attention, or we don't want to believe that, or we don't want to think about it. We don't want to go there.
Yeah, especially something along those lines, which is like, no, that was just a bad dream. That was a nightmare. Yeah. And when you mentioned not along the lines as death, but I remember my mom, my mom's still alive, but I remember all my life, she would wake up she would tell me, you know what, last night I dreamt that we were moving. We're going to be moving. And I'm like, no, we're not moving. Even there had been no conversation, no intentions, nothing. There was no possibility. She goes, nope. She goes, it doesn't fail. Whenever I have a dream about moving, it's going to come to pass. And I'd be like, no, because people will think, well, but sometimes people toy with the idea, and that's basically you're dreaming what you kind of already know in a way. Mm-hmm. But there was times that there was absolutely no conversation, no possibility that was going to happen. And I remember all my life, whenever she'd make that announcement, I'd be like, she should. Okay. After a while, when I got older, I realized, she had one of those dreams. Okay. All right. I fight it's going to happen. And sure enough, by the way, it would come to pass. It would come to pass one way or another. Well,
there's no linear time sequencing that goes on in dreams. I mean, they cut across all of the different, time zones, if you will. But so we're very able to see the future in our dreams if we're open to that, or to investigate the past as well. And we can do it through trance states. We can do it through different types of meditation and visualization experiences. Right. It's just that most of us don't, going back to what we were saying before, don't trust what we get from those experiences. And we tend to question that because this doesn't seem scientific, or this doesn't seem practical. Well,
and I think
it is, but that doesn't mean it's not real.
And we're so distracted also, I think, because we're all trying to multitask, that we're too distracted sometimes to, I think, quiet the mind a little bit to get those flashes that we would get to tell us, give us that nudge, or like, hey, and maybe I'm thinking, how they say that sometimes when we quiet down, when we go to sleep is when sometimes we have those dreams, is because that's about the only time that our mind is actually slows down enough for that to come through.
And that we're receptive to, I won't say intervention, but let's say connection from other spirits, from other places in the universe, and from other parts of ourselves.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I know sometimes people have way out dreams, and of course, because they have them in dream time, they kind of dismiss it as like, oh man, that was a really wild dream. Or, wow, that's never going to happen. And they kind of like, oh, okay. But it's like, yeah. And I want to say sometimes also our subconscious mind speaks to us in symbols that we don't understand. Sometimes people have this weird dream, and I tell everybody, if I tell you the word tiger, you don't see the word tiger, you see a tiger in your mind. I said to somebody, you say tiger, and to them it's an animal of beauty and power. You say tiger to another person, and it's like, it's going to eat me. So symbology for each person is different.
Right, and I think it's important to keep a list of your symbols so that you can see how they recur or how they evolve, and to understand more what they do mean, as you said, uniquely to the individual.
Right. Exactly that. Sometimes the best interpreter, and I hate to say it, of your own dreams is yourself, because it's like, how did it make you feel? I mean, because that same symbol could mean something totally different to somebody else.
Certainly.
Depending on their interpretation, their personal experiences, a million things that sometimes, and again, we come full circle to people's lack of trust in their own intuition or in themselves. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, like when people come to you, Skye, that they want the tarot reading, and I understand totally that sometimes people, it's not a lack of trust, it's just that they're looking for a little bit of guidance but do you ever find that a lot of times it's because people have kind of known all along that there was a direction, but they just didn't trust themselves? And hearing it, let's say, from somebody like you, it's like, oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, I think that happens. I don't like to put myself in the position of being the authority who knows all, but I think that sometimes people will consult me with that kind of impression in their own minds. And what I try to do as best I can is encourage them to pay attention to their own guidance. Of course, they're not going to necessarily know the way I do about the different movements of the planets, and they won't be able to interpret that if they've never studied it. And likewise with things like the tarot. But I do think it's very useful if people will start to follow their own symbols, as we were talking about, or certainly their own impressions and what we refer to as coincidence, which I don't think there's any such thing as coincidence. I think it's maybe synchronicity is a better word for it. Right. But yeah, I think that people do often come to me because they've had some sort of a feeling or an impression or even a vision sometimes that they don't understand, and they want to get a little bit more clarity on that, and hopefully I can offer that to them.
And one of the things, and when I said earlier that I think that sometimes because we're too distracted or we try to multitask or God knows there's a lot of things, that sometimes people, and when I say spiritual life, everybody's like, and I'm not talking, I mean, if it's church for you, that's fine, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about spirituality, I'm talking about you maybe quieting all that other stuff down and getting in contact with that part of you, which, like you said, sometimes interacts with the world that's around us, but it's unseen. Okay?
Yes.
And I know, for example, people sometimes when it comes to that ask either whether it's guardian angels, totem animals, or even guardian spirits. And I want to say, because a lot of people say, well, do you, one thing or the other? And I say, I think all those things, how can I say it? It's not that one is wrong or one doesn't exist and the other one doesn't. I think that everybody on an individual basis just has some version of that.
Yes, that's I agree. And I think they're all exist. I think they're all out there. I see them a lot.
For example, when sometimes people, when they say about, let's say, totem animals, that they say, well, because everybody thinks, let's say you're thinking a guardian angel, it's like human, so you always interpret it as a human type of guardian. But when people think of animals as being totems, I said, sometimes, it could be certain qualities about it that identify with you. Do totems, and that's another thing that I've heard people ask, is it like a guardian angel that it's the same one for all your life, or do they change throughout your life?
Well, my opinion is that we all have at least one very personal guardian angel who is with us forever. Mm-hmm. We might have more, but that they can invite other angels to come and help out when need be. Some of those other angels may have specific areas of expertise, if you will. Okay. And so our personal angels might invite them to come and offer a little extra assistance when needed. Okay. And the same with spirit animals, that we have certain totem animals who have a very close connection with us for our entire lives. But once again, we may have other animals who appear to us, whether it's in the dream state or whether it's in a physical way or some other vision, who appear when we need to know what they're trying to tell us or when we need the powers that they have, such as, okay, let's say you need to be more wary and more clever and more crafty about certain things. You might see a fox.
Okay.
Or if you see a heron, for example, and it isn't something that's normally in your environment, that might mean you need to pay more attention to being independent and thinking for yourself.
Right.
So that may not be your lifetime totem animal, but it may be telling you something you need to know now.
Right, and that involves a lot of paying attention to what's going on around you. In other words, as far as what people might think as, well, that's happenstance, but maybe just the timing on it. Like you said, you're seeing something that normally you wouldn't see, and then you ask yourself, why am I seeing that?
What does that mean to me? What are the energies of that animal? Yeah.
And people have a hard time thinking that the universe talks to you that way. I think people have a really hard time with that because sometimes people want things written out like, here's it is. I'm giving you a script. And it's like sometimes the universe is kind of like gives you messages in a lot of different ways.
Yes, and often it is telling you in a very obvious fashion if you were able to get outside of your expectations. Mm-hmm. And then you can see, because a lot of it is symbolic. If you can see the symbolism and understand that, then you can get the message that the universe is trying to tell you before it has to hit you on the head with the 2x4.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's happened to everybody along the line, some point where, it's like, I knew it. And I say I knew it because we just like, for a lot of reasons, sometimes plain old laziness or we just don't do it. We drag our butts on it, and then the inevitable comes, just like when you're in school and you get a project and you have the due date and you like procrastinate, and then it's the day before and you're like, oh my God, or the big exam. People sometimes do that a lot of times where they kind of know things internally and then they don't see all the indicators because...
Yeah, and I also think that a lot of people are afraid of the criticism or the judgment that others may make on them if they reveal some of these things.
Yes.
'Cause a lot of people, you and I don't worry about people thinking we're woo-woo. I mean, we are.
It's like, okay, all right. I have a very good... Why be normal? It's like, hello, that's boring.
But, a lot of people do think... When I sit down and talk to people off the record, so to speak, and they find out that I'm not going to judge them, they'll reveal all kinds of fascinating things to me that they think, maybe I shouldn't be thinking this, or maybe I shouldn't feel this way, or... but most of us have had experiences that someone else would think were weird.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not. We all have them, and the fact that we all have them means they're not weird. They're normal. They're very common, in fact. Yes. It's just that we're afraid to express it.
Oh, you will get that from, especially depending on, you'll get it from people that are like either police or military or doctors or, something that, you're supposed to be very analytical and everything. And either when they retire or off the record, it's like, oh, by the way, yeah, I've had this experience and that experience, but don't say anything because it's a career killer or,
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people also, I find, I live in a very conservative Christian community. Okay. And a lot of people tend to think that if they have visions or they, feel that there are things that come up in their subconscious that they can't necessarily rectify with the teachings that they've been taught, right. They think it's evil. And yes. So they're afraid to pay attention to it, and they want to get rid of it. And so I think that any time, like you're talking about, I think science has a similar kind of, places similar kinds of limitations on what we can believe, what we can accept, and what we can experience, just as many of the religious organizations do too. And to me, that's unfortunate because just because it's something that doesn't fit into a particular mold doesn't mean it's wrong.
Well, exactly, and I've talked to several people, like you said, that sometimes they're psychic, or they've had psychic experiences, stuff that they know in themselves that this is not my imagination. But because of where they worked at, or even their families, they shut it down quick, because to them it was like, I do not want to be ostracized.
Yes.
And I know that if I talk about this, I'm going to get ostracized. I've had guests that in my show that have had psychic experiences as children, and they've said that when they said something to their parents, children take things at face value. They're like, they didn't exactly get in trouble, but they were told, do not talk about that again.
Right, yeah. I had an experience a few summers ago when I met a little boy who was about 3, and he introduced himself to me as Will. And I spent some time with him as he showed me his house and his garden, et cetera, et cetera. And then I went to his parents and said, oh, your son Will is a really sweet little boy. And they said, his name's Sammy. And I said, well, why did he tell me his name was Will? And they said, oh, that's just his imaginary friend. So I went back to the little boy, and I said, why did you tell me your name was Will? Your parents say your name is Sammy. He said, in my old body, I was Will.
Oh, wow.
So I went back to his parents, and I said, listen to this child. Do not talk him out of this. He's telling you about a past life that he had.
Yes, yes.
And you can learn a lot if you just listen to him and honor his experience.
Yeah. But that scares, not all parents are that open-minded. It scares that a lot of, either it scares them, or they're religious, they have a certain, they want to shut that down right away.
And usually by the time we enter school, we have been shut down. But most children, I think, probably are pretty open to that stuff when they're 3, 4 years old. Yeah. And they just don't get any encouragement, and that eventually they realize they're being shut down.
Yes, no, it's like, well, and I hate to say it, and part of it is conformity, okay? I think also some parents, they're trying to protect their kid, because they don't want their child to be, because sometimes, they don't want their child to be the odd man out. Almost like they know if you start talking about that, you're going to get that reputation, and then I don't want to see you hurt. And some others, it's just because they shut them down, because they themselves might have had experiences themselves, and, it's...
Or they just don't want to go there.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to deal with it.
Oh, and I tell everybody, I have an aunt. She's if you met her, she's a very no-nonsense person all her life. No, and even when it comes to ghosts and spirits, she's very cut and dry. No, that doesn't. Then one day, she's, both me and my mother and her, they basically went to a convent school where they slept there, even though, and then they came home and, during the off season. And this was a very old convent school. Everything, when they have the church and the convent and the school all together. This was a very, very old building. She says, one day she's telling me the story. Oh, one day she's sitting there. She must have been 7 years old. She says she looks towards the doorway of the classroom, and she sees an altar boy, which was very out of place, by the way. She said, very sad looking. And she as a little kid thinking, what's he doing here? Because, in other words, there would not be any altar boys there dressed like an altar boy. And she says that she looked away, she looked back, he was gone. She had seen a ghost. She had seen a ghost as a little kid. And I was like, wait a minute. As far as I can remember it growing up, to you, there was no such thing as spirits or ghosts or none of that. But you're telling me that you saw a ghost of an altar boy. And she and then she just walked away. And it's it was one of those rare times that she, when people actually, and I'm thinking, I wonder how many other experiences she might have had that she's never talked about. And a lot of people do that. They swing in the other direction.
Yeah, I think we all experience those sorts of things at some time or another. I had an experience was not seeing the person, but I was getting ready to leave from work. It was about 5:30, and I said, I'm not staying any later tonight. I've been late every night. And just as I was getting ready to leave my office, I picked up the phone. The phone rang, and I picked it up. And there was a very interesting person on the other end. We had a lovely conversation for about 45 minutes. And finally, I hung up and got ready to leave. And as I was driving home, there was a huge traffic jam. There'd been a fatality accident on the road that I would have been on had I not picked up that phone, had I been there in the normal time that I had planned to be there.
Right.
I would have been in the middle of that accident. Maybe I would have been hurt. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I went back the next day and tried to call the person who, this is before caller ID and all that, tried to call back the person who had phoned me to let him know what had happened. There was an unlisted number.
Oh.
But I know that was, you could call it an angel or whatever,
yes.
who intervened to
Yes.
protect me at that particular time.
Yes. Isn't that incredible? That
Mm-hmm. And we've all had experiences like that.
Absolutely. Yes. And like you said, it wasn't just a regular, that was a day that you were like, I'm getting out of here now. In other words, your strong intention was like, I'm going to leave like now, because, and I think everybody that has worked for a living has found themselves in that predicament where, and then, you see stuff like that and you're thinking, okay, yeah, my guardian angel was like, whoosh. And sometimes we dodge the bullet and we don't know we dodged the bullet because we never have that moment like what you described where you saw the accident. Mm-hmm. And you knew the timing would have possibly been horrible if you would have left right when you intended. But sometimes things happen where we take a different route, we do something different, and we never... And
now I always pay attention.
Yeah, it's people don't realize sometimes. And like I say, I'm sure you've heard of the people, the premonition, that people have the premonition, I'm not getting on that plane, and then it crashes.
Yes.
And
Yeah, Edgar Casey talked about once he was getting ready to get on an elevator, and when the doors opened, he looked at all the people who were in the elevator already, and he couldn't see any life around any of them. And he didn't get on, and the elevator crashed.
Wow. See, that's...
But yes, most those stories are so common that they have to be true.
Well,
there has to be something.
And I tell everybody, how many people have those premonitions, dismiss them, and get on the plane? Mm-hmm. They don't live to tell a tale and say, oh, you know what? I either had a dream the night before, or my wife or my husband or somebody told me don't get on the plane, or even I knew I had a bad feeling, but I still did it because I thought it was my imagination and I feel stupid and I'm just getting on this plane. You're not alive to say I didn't pay attention to my intuition. Mm-hmm. As far as stuff like that goes.
If we do happen to get on that plane, or if we are in a massive event of some kind, I also think that we have agreed to that for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. That this is what we have chosen to be part of this event, whether it is to bring awareness to something or whether it is because we're all part of a collective, those of us who participate in the event, and we all want to go out together. There may be a zillion reasons, but I do believe that when we have situations such as 9/11 or some massive event like that takes place, that we have agreed to participate in it for some purpose that means something to us.
Right, and I know what you're saying, like that there was an agreement beforehand that this was going to be the manner, let's say, that we died. It was even though on a conscious level, it's like obviously we don't recognize it because then we wouldn't be there if because like
right.
And people don't
but
realize.
That is so
I think a lot of people sometimes don't realize that stuff or agreements that we come to before we're born. And of course, if we actually recognize them, we wouldn't be able to function in this plane because it just doesn't work. In other words, it's like we would be going crazy. We would just be totally in other words, you have to kind of be in ignorance of all those agreements that you made. Or sometimes I think people don't realize that sometimes you come to the fork in the road, and maybe you'll end up in the same place, but you can either do the short route or the long, long route.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with you totally on that. And I think it happens sometimes with illnesses too, that we may have an illness that we avoid through whether it's inoculations or whether it's through medical intervention or whatever it happens to be, and then later on that might give us a reprieve for a while, but later on we're going to find that something else was a manifestation of that we dodged the bullet, if you will, for a while. But, ultimately, I think all of those things are part of the map of our consciousness that we establish for ourselves for whatever reason.
Right.
And you're right, we don't know in advance, possibly not only because we would be afraid, but because it would interfere with the growth process and the lessons that we need to learn along the way if we knew that.
Right, exactly. It's almost like being ignorant is part of, in other words, what would you do? You have to make that whatever the choices are out of being in a state of ignorance of what the outcome's going to be. And I've done past life regression on people, and other people have always asked me, "Oh, do you believe in reincarnation?" I said, "I'll tell you what, I personally believe it, but usually what I tell them is because I've done it with clients who sometimes they have sometimes people do it just out of curiosity because they want to see what their past lives are, but I've done it also with people who have, let's say, for example, certain phobias they can't explain." And I said, look, sometimes I've seen it work with people who have done traditional therapies. They've gone through so many things and it hasn't worked. And they have no idea why they feel that way. Let's say that they're phobic about something. And sometimes doing a past life regression has taken them, there's like an understanding that they understand it. And contrary to what people think, because sometimes people think that if you have that aha moment, let's say in a past life regression series, you're going to come out and go, I get it. I'm not afraid of that. And that's not my experience. But usually, like within a couple of months the most, that fear leaves you. I mean, I've done it with people that I have fear of elevators. When you said that thing about, I've had people that they sweat bullets getting into an elevator or getting into an elevator by themselves. And if they have to go somewhere and if they see a building to them, it's like, oh my God. Or getting in a plane. And sometimes it doesn't have to do with a past life where they, had something horrible. Sometimes it's an organic problem. But I've seen that happen. And it's almost like there's something inside of you where you have to witness it, you have to see it, and then it kind of like clicks in your psyche and you're released from that moment. Usually it's usually that when you have a phobia, it was something pretty horrible that created it, on a soul level.
Yeah. I think Brian Weiss is one who's written extensively about that. Yes.
And he, when he came out with that book, Many Lives, Many Masters, what was it, back in the 80s, he was a hardcore scientist / psychiatrist, medical doctor. He didn't have any type of leaning in that direction. And a lot of the people that I've read up on that are doctors, usually they kind of like when their patient talks about it, they go with the flow, thinking it's all in the person's, like in their head. Okay, well, just go with it and see where it goes. Never realizing that what the person's actually experiencing is a past life. And then, of course, they're open-minded enough to talk about it and and accept it. In other words, leave the possibility, which I think sometimes a lot of now it's getting better. But I think a lot of the science and medical, they're kind of a little bit closed-minded when it comes to that. And something I wanted to touch on, which has to do with this guy, which is, the connection between the mind, the body, and the spirit, where sometimes, let's say, we'll use Western medicines. I think until recently, they didn't incorporate that in their treatments. It was strictly physical or medical in this fact, like medicine or treatments. But I don't think that they were taking into consideration the spiritual mind component as far as getting better.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to see in our lifetimes how this has turned around and how much that holistic approach has taken over and, is becoming so much more, well, even popular among mainstream, what we used to call mainstream, medicine, mainstream healing. But, yeah, it's much more receptive now, much more receptive, or we are much more receptive. I have a friend who is a Reiki master, and she's just recently incorporated Reiki into the treatments at our local VA hospital, which is, about as conservative as you could get. But finally, they're opening up to that, and they're finding they're very receptive to it, and it's really helping.
Yes, of course. I mean, I am the kind of person that if we could treat you by relaxing you versus giving you medication, why not? It's like, hello, maybe people need to learn, because I worked with people in relaxing, which so many people have many problems because they don't know how to relax. They don't have that moment where they just let go. They're too stressed out. And yes, it's inevitable. You need a little, stress happens, but they never turn off. And I think that a lot of our physical problems, not that it disappears, but some of it gets worse because we have no downtime from stress. And a lot of people now that they take medications for problems sleeping, things of because their mind doesn't turn off. That would be so much preferable than taking meds, than taking a lot of the stuff that they give to people. And and you're right, and I'm glad that nowadays doctors are thinking, okay, let me put this in the mix before writing a prescription for somebody.
And people also have to be aware themselves of the healing process, which is more than going to a doctor and relying on the doctor, or going to medications and relying on drugs. We have to be responsible ourselves for the quality of our own health and the quality of our own lives, and realize that our bodies know how to heal themselves.
Yes,
and if we can trust that and pay attention to it, we don't have to go through a lot of these things. We don't have to give over our power to some authority, or to we have our own inner body wisdom.
Yes. And I think a lot of times I think it's because society puts it in a certain way that, and I'm going to give you a perfect example. My mom, I want to say, when she went to her 50s, she had a little bit of high blood pressure, so she would take medicine. They give you little pills. And there was a point also where she would, she wasn't diabetic, but, she would control it with diet, and they gave her little meds, and she got a little bit older. She was developing Alzheimer's, but my mom had always been really, really good, I have to say, about taking her medicine. She health-wise, she was okay just for these little things. Somewhere along the line, because she had her own apartment, Skye, my mom had stopped taking the medicine she used to do for the diabetes, or to keep her sugar, whatever. And she wasn't testing herself. And I was like, crap. So I took her to another doctor, and I was like, oh my God. And the doctor says, well, you know what? Her blood sugar is testing okay today. Let's keep an eye on it and let's see what happens. Guess what? My mom, her own body regulated. She didn't need the meds ever again. Okay?
And it will if we allow it to, because we know in our body wisdom what we need.
Yes. And
it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with our thoughts. We create our world, our reality.
Yes.
And that if we focus on illness, we're going to attract illness to us. If we focus on being well and healthy and happy, we'll attract that to ourselves. It's just our minds give our bodies the commands to generate in a particular way, whatever that might be. And by the time it finally gets down to the body level, it's been in the mental body, it's been in the emotional body for quite a while, evolving down to finally a physical level where the body is saying, okay, pay attention.
Yes, exactly. Like, all right, I've tried everything else, but so now I'm going to have like a, not a breakdown, but okay, I'm something that you cannot overlook or dismiss or ignore or whatever the case might be. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book called the emotional, what is it called? It's about the emotions and how they, Healing Power of Illness, that's the name of the book, which links in a very easy to understand way a number of our common illnesses and the psychological dynamics behind them.
Yes.
And it makes so much sense when you look at the fact that everything is interconnected. We don't have just the physical, we don't have just the mental or just the emotional. They're all part of the whole pattern.
Yes, and a lot of people don't, and that's and I'm glad you pointed out because in truth a lot of illnesses are not strictly organic, as in the body, and because people sometimes it's like not only what are you thinking, it's how are you feeling. Like, tell me how you feel, not what you're thinking, how you feel, because I think a lot of it translates into our bodies. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say it, when it shows up, of course, in disease, then we're talking negative feelings.
Yes, absolutely.
And the more you ignore it, depending, of course, how bad that feeling is. If it's maybe something that you've been, let's say, in denial about for years, maybe even from childhood. Maybe it does. Mm-hmm. It's taken 50 years, but it's going to pop up in such a way that you say, "Well, you know what? You're going to have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to have to deal with it, no matter what." And I've seen that on more than one occasion. That there's no way, really, in truth, to separate it, because obviously, we are more than just ourselves as far as the skin suit goes. There's our self-awareness, our spirit, our soul. I mean, everybody, wants to describe it a different way. But what goes on there actually affects us in our body. And I absolutely agree with you that we dismiss how much ability our body has to heal itself. Because we're, like you said, we're too dependent to going to an authority figure, like a medical doctor, for him to tell us this is what's wrong with you and this is how we're going to fix it, usually with maybe some type of medicine or some type of other treatment. And then we're like, okay, then a lot of people consign themselves, especially if they're older, that they're going to be on this regimen sometimes of drugs or medications. Like, that's it. No, it's just this part of getting old. It's like, not really.
No, it's part of having old thinking.
Old thinking, exactly. Old thinking. But anyway, Skye, I wanted to thank you so much for spending this time with me tonight. It has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you because we've covered a lot of the areas that are near to my heart because I'm hoping that, I feel that part of the changes that we were talking about is like more enlightenment as far as how we exist. How's that? Whatever your existence level is, everybody's circumstance is different. And then that extends outwards to other people. And then, of course, everything, our environment, nature, blah, the whole thing. So,
yeah, I agree with you. And I see it as bringing welcome and much needed change into breaking down the old limits and the old barriers.
Yes. And change is not a bad thing. Scary, but absolute sometimes. But overall, at the end, I think it's always serves the best and most positive outcome for everybody.
Well, we have no choice in it, right? Isn't the only constant change?
Yeah, and that's what people,
You can't avoid it.
you can't, and sometimes it's like, it's going to happen no matter what you do, how much you dig your heels in, it's going to happen. So might as well go with it.
Yeah.
What is it? Like, hold tight. Here we go. When you get on the roller coaster, like, here we go.
And we'll just go with it. You're right. And I really appreciate you having me on tonight and giving me the opportunity to talk with you and share ideas with your audience. It's always fun.
And by the way, I am going to have a link to your website on the credits of the show. But for my podcast listeners, what is the website where they can find you at?
Okay, my website is skyealexander.com. And I'm trying to find a good web designer to update it. So if you know of anybody, please let me know.
Okay, we'll put it out there. Well, somebody, they can get in touch with you at that website and take it from there. And absolutely. But again, thank you so much, Skye. It has been wonderful. And
thank you.
I want to wish you the best of luck in any new projects you might have coming up.
Yeah, I have a new book coming out in a few days.
Oh, you are? What is that? What is that about? Because I've been showing a banner here with some of your most recent releases.
Oh, thank you.
But what book is it that you've got coming out?
It's called Magical Astrology.
Oh.
And it is actually a updated, revised, completely rewritten version of a book called by the same title that I wrote almost 20 years ago. And I like that it's coming back into print and that it's there's a lot of new information, and that should be out any day now. You can already do pre-orders, but I'm looking forward to getting my copy sometime this week, and that should be fun.
Okay.
And I've got 5 more books coming out this year, so I'm
This is going to be a busy year for you, definitely.
It's going to be a big year for me, yes.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
So I hope maybe we'll talk again sometime.
Absolutely, darling. Take care. It has been wonderful.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Isn't she fantastic? See? And, you've been seeing the books, well, the ones listening. Okay. But she's been writing for a really long time. And she has different books. Some of them, like I said, she works in the area of astrology. She does tarot reading, feng shui. She does have different books on witchcraft. And obviously she's going to update that one that she put out 20 years ago. That's definitely due for a revision, which is great because, sometimes things stay the same, but other times they change. And you could tell that Skye, and I'm really so glad because truly, I said it before, despite, how can I say it, how much we get bombarded that everything is about us physically, physically how we look, what we dress, physically, physical, and when people have crisis, whether it's your health or spiritually, people go through crisis, okay, or meltdowns or, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes things happen to us that causes the crisis, or to somebody close to us that, of course, affects us. And then other times, people just hit a wall, and sometimes family members around them or friends or co-workers are caught totally by surprise. Like, oh my God. And the reason why I point this out is that sometimes you'll see somebody from the outside that their lives might look perfect. And when I say their lives, as in how they look and the lifestyle they have, and they look very put together and even organized. And then all of a sudden something happens to them and they have almost like a crash and burn moment without an apparent crisis causing it. And everybody around them is like, where did that come from? And the point I'm trying to make is that we can have a spiritual and or mental or spiritual or in and of itself a separate one crisis that we disguise first of all very much. Why? Because everybody around us goes by what we look like or what things appear as, or how successful this person appears, like they're really together. And because of course we're talking here, whether it's the mental or the spirit, it's not tangible per se. There's no way to measure it. And people sometimes, like what we were talking about, people tend to ignore that, or they don't want to address it because sometimes it might be something painful going on. Okay, it could be something painful having to do with their careers, with their relationship. Maybe they look like, man, you should be happy, but you're not. And people sometimes have a hard time coming to grips. I'm going to say this because in their mind, or society, or all the commercialism or stuff that we get put in, driven into us, is like, when you have this, or when you get there, or then you'll be happy. And then all of a sudden they get to that point, that level, and they're like waiting for the aha moment. I should be happy because I have this, or I got that, or I'm working here, and it's like, huh? And a lot of people can't come to grips with that because their spiritual, mental part, they've kind of shoved it aside. And then they have this, because they're kind of lopsided, and then they have a crisis. And I think we do so at our own peril. I really do. I think a lot of our physical health is affected by what's going on in our minds and in our spirit, in our soul, if you want to call it that. And sometimes I absolutely agree with Skye. Sometimes illnesses that we manifest are things that we've not paid attention to on our spirit / emotional / mental level. And it comes to the point where our body manifests it because it's just, you can't ignore it anymore. And by this, a lot of people think of, I was saying about spirituality, that you're walking around going, it's like, no. But I think that, again, because life has become so fast-paced, technology. See, I'm old enough to remember what it was like before everybody had a phone. Everybody had one of these, a phone. I remember what it was like that you even had, when beepers came in, pagers. Okay, pagers at one time, about the only people that had pagers were doctors. Somebody who's really important. And what I'm saying is that the stressors that have come, it's good because you think, man, if I have a phone and I'm in an emergency, I can reach out. But the flip side of it has been that it has made our lives more complicated. We have no downtime. We don't have moments to say, you know what, let me just veg out. Let me just think about stuff. Let me just or not think about anything. You know how good that is? Where you just space out for a bit and just not think about stuff. Like, let it go. And maybe sit on a park bench or whatever, just an example, and look at the clouds and look at the trees and people watch, just people watch. How good that feels. Let me tell you something. Take your shoes off, put your toes in the grass or whatever, and just let me tell you something. I think that if more people did that, people would be happier and healthier in small doses. And I'm going to bring this up because you know how people sometimes say, I'm going to do a getaway. I'm going to take this vacation. I think about this. And it's like, you know what? If you're going to wait once a year or more, because sometimes people go years sometimes without vacations. No wonder people are so super stressed. It's like, no, we need to have like these, even if it's a 10-minute vacation in the day, that we stop, because all these technological advances have basically decimated all the open time that people used to have where they could do that. Because now with one of these, people expect, whether it's your family or your boss or just any of your friends, expect you to be instantly accessible. Like, I called you. Why didn't you answer the phone? Huh? And I'm telling you, I think it's been not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because they're very useful, but our boundaries have been totally like run over. They don't exist. And it's happened to me, where even when you do that, you start feeling guilty. Yeah, I'm not going to think of my to-do list. I'm not going to think of what I need to do tomorrow, or maybe what I have to do maybe an hour from now. I mean, what's wrong with that? Nothing. And it all becomes, it affects what we all are as far as our brains, which produce how we feel, which then is internalized in our body. That if people just were able to step back with, of course, no guilt, because that's another bad feeling to have, which generates its own health problems down the line if you feel it enough, which is guilt, which is, I need to just be in the moment, in the now. And I know a lot of people just like live in the now. By this, I don't mean like, yes, live in the now is very important, but when I mean in the now, it's like, don't even think about living in the now. It's just blank out and relax and disengage your mind, because somehow we think that if we do this, it's better. You know, if I can do this, but in the meantime I'm doing that, and then at the end of the day I'll have more time to think about more stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I think that what Skye mentioned also, as far as changes coming up for 2019, I think a lot of people feel it. And even before we started recording, we were talking about how sometimes people say, oh, they want change, whether it's personally on a larger scale. But then when things start moving in that direction, especially what it looks like maybe this year, which is not going to be not quite as slow as, they kind of like wig out, like, no. It's like, yeah, okay. And you can either get swept along with it, it's going to happen. Or you could say, you know what, this is scary. I don't know where this is going to end up at. Am I going to be able to handle this? New stuff? Different? Oh my God. And part of you's going to say, I'm going to hang tight and I'm going to go with the flow. And I'm going to be excited and I'll handle it. Whatever it is, I'm going to get there. And I personally, I'm one of those that's excited about change. Don't get me wrong. I have my routines. I like stability just as much as any other human being. But I do get excited about change. And I think it's necessary. Because I think the worst thing for the human spirit is stagnation. And a lot of people cling to what they know because, well, maybe I'm not happy with this, but God, that's better than what? The unknown? Forget it. We all need to like move along. And by this, I mean, there's a lot of people think of like, oh, when you're in your teenager, in your 20s, and I think we need to do that all the way through till we die. Yeah, we have our routines, but we need to be like, always get excited about the change and welcome it and just trust in our intuition, trust ourselves, trust in the divine, whatever you want to call it, whatever floats your boat, that you're going to be okay. You're going to come out at the other end of it. And you know, what's that thing? Expect good things. So anyway, guys, thank you for being part of my audience. You're all wonderful. I'm so glad you come back every week for shows. And of course, as you know, links to the videos and to the podcast are available at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. There's also direct links to podcast platforms. I know a lot of people have favorite ones such as Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes. I have direct links there that will take you to the show files. Or like I said, or if you want to download the MP3 files, or if you want the link to the video portion of the show. Also, you can submit your stories, whatever they might be. Send them there's the tab there that says submit your story. Or you can send it to Marlene at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Because of course, I'm always looking for new stories. My last book just came out less than 60 days ago, Supernatural Safety, which one of the parts that I mentioned is exactly what Skye was describing, what people should do before they move into a new house, or they bring in something into their house, something they picked up on the curb, in the flea market, in the garage sale, something even that dare I say it, even your old auntie gave you. You need to work on that. You know, you need to like bring it in fresh into your living space. Okay. Your sanctuary, because that's what our homes should be, our sanctuary. I feel like Quasimodo. But anyway, thank you again. You guys, I've gotten a lot of suggestions for show themes. I've got a lot of great guests. As you know, I've also putting out another series. It's called Supernatural Storytime, which is I'm retelling a lot of the stories that I've received from true believers or stuff that I've received for like over 20 years on emails that people have sent me. Short stories about experiences that they've had. So I thought, but the best way, because the truth is, everybody's so shy. First of all, a lot of these emails, I got them years ago about experiences people had. There's no way of me to be able to. And most people I've noticed don't really want to talk directly or retell it. So this was the best format that I had of retelling these stories that people have had about their experiences. So make sure that you can go to supernaturalstorytime.com, but if not here, I do have that series and you're going to find it very, very interesting. Again, these are just stories about events and things that people have experienced. It doesn't have to be with ghost or paranormal, and sometimes it's never explained how or why that happened or what the outcome was, which is great. But people have had the experiences nonetheless. And again, I have fantastic guests coming on. Subscribe wherever it is that you are getting stories of the supernatural so that you are aware when I release new shows. Okay. And again, and if you ever want to find out as far as if I'm going to be making any appearances, I'm posting them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or on the website of Miami Ghost Chronicles. If I'm going to be doing any talk show appearances, or if I'm going to be at any event. For example, I'm going to be doing a holistic event now coming up in about a week. Okay, that's usually the best place. Also, if I have any type of paranormal news, and I'm going to give you, for instance, I do have sometimes casting companies, producers of shows that have reached out to me because they've got a show that they're thinking of putting together and they're looking for people, true stories. And for example, right now, probably by the time you hear it, they're got somebody that's trying to cast children that are psychic. And they're asking between the ages of 8 to 16. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, I don't know when you hear this, that information there will be there on who to get a hold of and also what they're looking for. So, and before I forget, I am going to be doing, like I said, my free monthly giveaways every month, whether it's books or I always got something going on. Maybe now for Valentine's Day. We'll be doing a giveaway again. So guys, I look forward to 2019 and enjoying a lot of spooky times together. Take care.